Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Thursday, February the 16th, 2023. Again, we continue with our look at last week's gospel reading, Matthew 8, 1 through 17, the three healing stories, the leper, the Roman centurion's slave, and also Peter's mother-in-law. We're kind of focusing this week more on that first part and the idea of the leprosy. I talked about leprosy a little bit more in detail yesterday. But as I did in my sermon on Sunday, while we don't have, much contact in modern days with the severe form of leprosy that we know as Hansen's disease, we've had a very significant disease in recent memory, namely AIDS, HIV/AIDS, that has resulted in the same kind of ostracism and making people, live completely apart and so forth, particularly in the beginning years. And a fellow by the name of Kent Millard, who I quoted in my sermon, also talked about the need for Christians to reach out as Christ did today, to heal and to serve and to care for those who are excluded by the church and society alike because of their illness, as he writes, and in particular send faithful followers to reach out with healing and loving hands to those who are living with HIV/AIDS. And so he talks at some length about congregations and in particular one in Indianapolis that works with AIDS victims in Africa and so forth. But also he emphasizes our need to not forget them in our own midst. He writes, several years ago, I visited a pastor of a small rural congregation who told me this amazing story. A member of her congregation had a son who had lived in another city, but now had an advanced case of AIDS and wanted to come home to die. The mother was not sure how this small rural community would accept him, so she and her son invited the pastor to their home to share their concerns. And the pastor assured them that their family was loved by Christ and the church would continue to be welcome, and he would continue to be welcomed in the congregation, and that they would pray for her son for his healing. And when the son became too ill to attend church members brought in meals to the family, and the pastor met with him to plan his funeral and was at his bedside when he left this world and entered eternal life. All their family and friends attended the funeral service, thanked God for the gifts of his life, and surrendered him into the loving hands of God. And the pastor told me, writes Millard, that the mother wept when she thanked her and the congregation for their love and compassion during the loss of her son. People living with illnesses, but in particular something like HIV/AIDS, are in all of our communities. They're all around the world. The only question is, do we banish them because of our fear and our judgments, or do we follow the example of Jesus, who reached out to them with love and compassion? Tony Campolo, I shared some stories of his on Sunday, and sharing a couple more this week as well. He wrote once about being asked to preach at an evangelistic crusade, and they were looking for a particular way to designate the offering that was going to be collected, and he suggested, why not give it to those who were suffering from AIDS? And fortunately, they agreed to it. Well, it created a real big reaction, I guess, from the community, and so at the crusade, the place was lined with television cameras who had all come to see this offering. And as he writes, the mass choir sang, but the television cameras were not turned on. I preached, they paid no attention. They were waiting, you see, for the offering at the end of the service. And as the buckets were passed to collect the contributions that would go for people with AIDS, then the cameras were turned on. The newspaper photographers were snapping pictures. This is what they came to see. Evangelicals sacrificially giving to meet the needs of people with AIDS, most of whom, especially at that time, this is some years ago, were homosexuals. Later that night, I was in my hotel room, writes Campolo, watching the evening news to see how the whole thing was covered. And They not only showed the offering being taken, but they interviewed people as they were leaving the arena. One old grandmother was moved to tears as she said, "My grandson has AIDS, and this is the first time that I've been able to talk about it because up until now I was made to feel so ashamed of him. I feel he was affirmed tonight." And there were a few other comments that were made, but the best one of the evening, he said, came from a rough-looking guy who was a little bit overweight. His hair was a mess. He looked as though he needed a shave, but they stuck a microphone under his mouth and they asked him, "Well, what did you think of the offering tonight?" And the guy answered in a gruff voice, "What about it?" And the interviewer said, "Well, people with AIDS are usually homosexuals, and you evangelical Christians haven't been very kindly disposed to them, have you? How do you feel about your money going to people tonight who are probably gay?" And the guy's answer was splendid. He said, "I don't know anything about this homosexual stuff. All I know is that when people are sick, we're supposed to take care of them. That's because Christians love everybody." And Tony Campolo, as he writes, stood up in the hotel room, shot my fists into the air, and yelled, "Yes." In the end, he writes, "They will know that we are Christians, not because we perform miracles or demonstrate signs and wonders. They will know we are Christians by our love." Good thought to leave you with today, and we'll be back with you again tomorrow. Until then, take care. Bye.